Okay, good morning or good afternoon. My name is Marian Lazar, again from the NATO Counterintelligence Center of Excellence, and I have the pleasure to be the moderator of this panel. As you already know, we have the pleasure and the honor to have here on this stage 5 distinguished speakers coming from national military, from Poland and Slovakia, and 3 speakers coming from technology companies like Microsoft we have here, Facebook, and IronNet. Before starting the conversation, please let me try to do the impossible, meaning to clarify a little bit the concept, the hybrid warfare. The story started in 2007. It was an American analyst, Frank Hoffman, who introduced this concept, hybrid warfare. And it was after 2006 Lebanon war. And he said the hybrid warfare is a new type of war in which many kinds of war are used simultaneously in the best way suiting a specific context. Now, fast forward 2015, Russia's invasion in Ukraine, and its annexation of Crimea. The world discovered an article of a Russian general, Valery Gerasimov, published in 2013. And that was the moment when I think that the hybrid warfare made its momentum, because the Russian general tried to portray in his article the future war, reflecting the Western way of doing war in the future, in his view. Now, the concept has evolved in the last 12 years. And I think that the current conceptualization has an obvious cyber component, pointing toward the way the cyber-enabled technology works as a potential game changer. And let me give you several examples, and you are fully aware of them, like hack and leak operations, large-scale cyberspace disinformation or propaganda operations, or vote manipulation. And probably here you can see a problem, a terminology. I mean, we are talking about war, but in fact, we're not talking about military operations, military activities. And that's the reason, as you saw in the previous presentation, sometimes some organizations prefer to talk about hybrid threats because of this reason, because there is no military activity. Now, there is an international agreement and on the definition of hybrid warfare. And this agreement is, we don't have an agreed definition. But I will do my best to provide a sort of definition. This definition was created in 2015 by the Defense and Security Committee. This is part of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. And the definition is this: the use of asymmetrical tactics to probe for and exploit weaknesses via non-military means, such as political, informational, and economic intimidation and manipulation, that are backed by the threat of conventional and unconventional military means. And you can see here that, again, there is a link to 2014 and Russia's intervention in Ukraine. One last sentence. The hybrid threats are part of the foreign intelligence operations. And this is one of the reasons that it's so difficult to detect them and to counter them. And they are carried by many states, for sure. Counterintelligence, and this is the world I belong, have a critical role in identifying and countering hybrid activities. Having said this, I like to ask the first question, and the first question is to Ms. Hokmanova. Yeah, please take the microphone. Another way to look at the hybrid warfare is this: is an attempt by a state actor to achieve objectives using kinetic and not kinetic means in such a manner that it cannot be tied to the conflict as a direct belligerent. And the question is this: what is the role of the military cyber defense commands in the hybrid warfare? knowing that a good part of the hybrid activities are on the private platforms outside of the military networks in reality?
Dear Mariam, thank you very much for the possibility to open this panel with a great question. However, I do not have a clear answer for this. However, we do have cyber defense commands which heavily depend on the national legislation, and the rule and the responsibility of these commands are different across different nations, so there is nothing like a universal principle. What I can answer is based on the experience of our military Cyber Defense Center, how does it work here in the Slovak Republic. So our Cyber Defense Center has a very good relation also with the private sector, and we need to provide the support to the different critical information infrastructure providers when it comes to cyber attacks. Slovakia last year approved concept for fight against hybrid threats. And according to this document, which was approved at the highest governmental level, there is nothing like one specific body which should be responsible for dealing the hybrid threats. However, this document relies mainly on existing organizational and legislative measures. However, this document also set the number of indicators which can trigger hybrid warfare. One of the indicators is cyber attack with a significant impact on the society. And based on the current legislation we have in the Slovak Republic, our military cyber defense center is obliged to provide the support to those infrastructure which are impacted with this kind of significant attack. So not only the military networks, but we are also providing support to the essential service provider as well as information critical infrastructure providers, telco operators, healthcare industries, energetic industries, and so on. But our Cyber Defense Center is quite focused directly on cyber, and we are not able to evaluate whether we are already talking about a hybrid threat aiming at our infrastructure. So we need to forward the results of investigation to the higher level. And the higher level in Slovak Republic is our National Analytical Fusion Center and also the Situational Center, which are gathering all inputs from other institutions responsible for different domains and evaluating the situation. So keep it short. What our Cyber Defense Center as a cyber command is doing in cooperation with the private industry, we are defending core infrastructure as well as share information with all significant and important institutions and parties at the national level.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The second question is for General Molenda, and I think the purpose of the first two questions is to try to further clarify the concept of hybrid warfare. Now, we have basically a global network which has made us more connected, more automated, and allowed for more precise messaging than ever before. The cyberspace is a critical medium to any hybrid warfare, and cyberspace provides a way to reach the target population with greater speed and intensity. And the question is, in your opinion, what are the most dangerous threats to the national security coming through cyberspace, and that could be considered a part of the hybrid aggression? Sir?
So thank you for the question and for the possibility to be the part of this panel. So thinking about the cyberspace and hybrid warfare and using cyberspace as a medium of attacks or malicious activity, so we see that how the time changes and how the cyberspace is becoming the most important medium for such kind of hybrid attacks or hybrid warfare or conflict. So, of course, the answer to the question is should be ambiguous, but I believe it's very difficult to say like which cyber threat, which threat is will the most jeopardize the national security at the largest extent, because it is a matter of cyberspace as it is. So we have there are lots of threat actors, and so as it was said already before, as a defenders, we need to defend all the possible routes or the hosts and assets in the network. The attackers needs to be succeed once, and they are in. So thinking about that, and thinking that we have several different threat actors, and all of them are using cyber weapon, which have a great factors connected with it. So thinking about the cyber weapon, we need to highlight that the cyber weapon is a kind of weapon which have a three good factors. So it is effective, it is affordable and deniable. So it does the job, and it's cheap, and you can say that it's not your weapon. So because of these factors, it is and will be in future, I believe, the cyberspace as a background for attack for the hybrid world as well. So what we can do, we should pay our attention to how to define, how to monitor, how to notice, to shorten the time needed to find out that we were under such an attack. And of course, we need to, based on the state-of-the-art technology, to be able to monitor, gather the information about the threats. But of course, we should always remember about the human factor, about the specialist level, skilled personnel with different areas. So for sure we should have a specialist with IT, but also CTI or ITC, which will work hand in hand with the guys from different areas of responsibility, like psychological area. So we should invest in teams ready to somehow check if we are not under such a hybrid warfare attack based on the cyberspace. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The next question is for General Alexander. Sir, I hope you agree with me if I say that a government can better protect the country when there are strong links with the private sector. Otherwise, a good portion of the environment could be a blind spot for the government. What are your thoughts, sir, on this cooperation with the private sector? And what was your experience in working with this sector as an NSA director? And to complete the question, what can the private sector offer to the government in terms of cybersecurity technologies?
So it's a great question. I don't know. No, just kidding.
I'm the same position.
Yeah, that's it. Actually, you know, this was an issue that our Congress would ask me all the time. Is the role of Cyber Command to defend the Defense Department, or is it to defend the nation? And when you look at our Constitution and all governments, governments were created to defend the country, not to defend the government themselves. And so when you think about that, the wealth of our country isn't our government. The wealth of our country is the Microsoft, the Facebook, the Amazon, the companies that make up our economy, that make our country great. And we have in our Constitution, and I was asked all the time when I went to Congress, General, have you read the Constitution? I'd pull it out. This one? And there's a really good sentence that says, for the common defense. We create this government for the common defense. In fact, we all create our governments for common defense. It's not to defend the government. It's to defend our nation, our wealth, our economy. And the problem is, when you talk about hybrid warfare and what you brought in here, the fact is, those that wish us harm are going to attack us to break our will to fight back. Clausewitz. I'm not a historian, I'm a tech guy, but he's the one that said, You know, the purpose of war is to get another country to give in, to get their people to give in. And when you think about that, and you look at where we are today, cyber is an element of national power. Cyber will be used by other nations to inflict upon us harm. And we look at cyber, well, that's what my kids play with, my grandchildren. This is where we have our capabilities, where my wife and daughter share Facebook, and it's where we live, it's where our wealth is, it's where our intellectual property is. And it's where we will be attacked because it brings together our energy sector, our finance sector, our defense industrial base, our economy. And when you look at that, you come back with one conclusion. This is an area where the government and industry have to work together because the government cannot do it itself. The government cannot defend the nation if the government cannot see the attacks on the country. And so how do we share that? How do we create that picture? I'm not talking about sharing personally identifiable information. I'm not talking about sharing our intellectual property. I'm talking about sharing threat data about an attack. So if you go back to the attacks on the Ukraine, the fact is the Ukraine government couldn't see those attacks in time to stop them. If you look at the attacks on Saudi Aramco, they started 60 days before. They couldn't see them. They didn't stop it. And the government solely has the authority and responsibility to attack back. No commercial industry can do that. And so when you think about that, you're now in a position where if the government's responsibility is to attack back, but the government can't see it, we have a broken system. And so from my perspective, what has to happen is government and industry have to build that picture together. We do it in air traffic control. We build an air traffic control picture so that we can see air traffic and everybody can fly safe. We don't have an air traffic control picture for cyber. We need to build it. And interestingly, you know, and it's great to have Microsoft and Facebook here, add in others across all our governments when you think about it. We have the technical ability to do just that, to build that picture. So that when we do come under attack, and I believe we will, we have a way of working together to move forward. My time when I was the director, almost 9 years, my father-in-law said it was because I couldn't get a job on the outside. I was on the public dole. But the reality was it was amazing. We had great relationships with industry. Now I think we need to take that another step. Because in this area, we will be tested. Industry is the vast majority of cyber. It's also our wealth. It's where everything exists. And the government, and so General Melinda, in what you do, you're responsible now for defending your country. But if you can't see it, you can't do your job. Build the picture, create the roles, responsibilities, the norms for operating in cyberspace. That's what I believe we have to do. And I would push back on anybody who says, oh, it's not technically achievable. I think move those people out of the room, bring all the people who think it's technically achievable into the room, and let's do it. And that's what when you think about what companies like Facebook, what Microsoft did in the mid-'80s with IBM, they said, oh, we don't think that's doable. Microsoft went off and built it. Let's build the common picture for cyber. And I think I would take it one step further. When you look at the whole purpose of this conference was to bring nations together, because it's not the United States defending the United States. It's not Poland defending Poland or Slovakia defending. It's how do we work together for a common defense, for a collective defense? Because if we did that, if we put our talent, our insights, our vision together, we could defend in cyberspace and take this off the table as a threat. Why don't we do that? And the answer is, well, we've never done that before. Okay, why don't we in the future? That's where this is going to go. And it's going to require us, either after something bad happens, preferably before, for us to work together. And so what excites me about being here is the opportunity to work with all of you and industry for a common strategy for defending our nations in cybersecurity, because we will be challenged. Just 10 more minutes, no, just two more things. You know, it's interesting, if you go back in history, people saw the aircraft carrier was not going to be an element of war, it was going to be actually an element for reconnaissance. And they saw the airplane, no, that's not going to be used for combat because it's just recon, we don't see it doing anything, and now look at where the airplane is. Cyber is going to go through the same evolution, and you're seeing it. So we have to get out in front of that because we will be tested. And I believe we have a lot to lose in cyber because that's where our energy sector, our finance, everything is brought together in cyber. You know, all the power, all this great technology we have exists on that infrastructure. It's vulnerable. Those that wish us harm can attack it, and we're not prepared to defend it, and we need to get on with it.
Thank you, sir. Your answer leads me to the next question for Mr. Frank. We are living in a time when corporate responsibility and national responsibility are increasingly interrelated. Taking this into account, businesses have not only a great power, but also a great responsibility to protect people and to be responsible for their business model. And the question is, what is the real responsibility of the private sector in this new reality? And to what extent can businesses be held accountable for the misuse of their products and services?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And let me just build on what General Alexander just said. I mean, governments protect citizens, we protect customers, and they're the same people. And it is a little intimidating to find ourselves in the middle of hybrid warfare, but that is where the technology is. You know, we helped build the modern era of computation, and we have a special responsibility to ensure that our products and our ecosystem, not just in the way we'd hope they'd be used, but the way they actually are used responsibly. And so we feel a special responsibility about how do we work together with governments and civil society and industry together to protect our customers, citizens. And so it you know, activities across a wide range of things, but our belief is in the new world we live in, it will be the multi-stakeholder model of governments and industry really working together, not just doing meetings, but doing projects together to advance cybersecurity. There's some things that we can't do that governments can do. On the other hand, this is an area where you know, the internet is 97% owned and operated by private sector. The technology that's running government is also the same commercial off-the-shelf technology that's largely, you know, running the civilian society. There's just a different linkage now than we've seen before. Just one initiative I want to talk about is the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace that was launched a year ago at the inaugural Paris Peace Forum. And it was launched with the support of the Polish government and the Slovak government, and in fact all the EU member states signed up to support it, along with about 300 private sector and civil society groups. And this year at the Paris Peace Forum we'll announce further signatures, but you know, we're up to about 65 countries and several hundred private sector and civil society groups, where we're pledging to work together on 9 challenges. It's not an exhaustive list, but everything from, you know, core ones about strengthen our capacity to prevent malign interference by foreign actors aimed at undermining electoral processes through malicious cyber activities, as one of the 9. And so we have to work together, and we think, you know, technology companies that put technology out in the world need to take special responsibility for how it's actually used in the world. And so we've been working at how do we strengthen email, following the famous doxings of the 2016 political campaign in the United States. And so we have an account guard program so that political parties, think tanks, politicians can get the highest level of enterprise protection and monitoring for their email that we provide to our largest enterprises. And we do announce with customers' permission when we see state activity that's targeting civilian customers. And so just this week we announced that an advanced persistent threat group we call Strontium, which I think is also known as Fancy Bear, we'd seen them attacking the anti-doping agencies around the world in advance of the 2020 Olympics. We've announced think tanks in Europe, political campaigns, because we want this to be out there to say that this activity is not acceptable. We've also taken steps to ensure that the online information we provide is, we want it to be better. And so we support very much initiatives like NewsGuard, which curates the sources of news rather than trying to do fact-checking. Fact-checking is great, but you can't keep up with the volume. And so, looking for what are solutions that across the disinformation campaigns that are run that we can bring forward. So I think we do have a special responsibility, and we have to take account the very dangerous situation that's created by hybrid war.
Thank you, sir. The next question is for Mr. Christensen. Before the question, just a bit of background, and this is not an advertisement. There's going to be a link between this background and the question. So worldwide, there are over 2.4 billion monthly active Facebook users, and this data is from June 2019. The world population between 15 and 65 is around 5 billion. Out of 7.7 billion, the whole world population. So Facebook has the potential to reach half of the active world population, which is staggering. There is a battle for the narrative, which is an essential component of the hybrid warfare. And this battle includes propaganda, meaning biased or misleading information, misinformation, and this is false information passed on in good faith by users, and disinformation, and this is false information willfully disseminated. And the question is, what can Facebook do to minimize the impact of the hybrid activities, like the ones I just mentioned, on its platform?
So thank you for the opportunity to come today. I think this is a really important debate, and Facebook is very happy to be part of it. And as other speakers have already alluded to, I do think as a technology platform, obviously, we have an enormous responsibility to deal with the issues that take place, and especially if there's abuse of our platform, that is something we have to deal with. Some of it, I definitely think, as other speakers on this panel have said earlier, is about collaboration. It is about exchange in industry, about best practices, what works, what doesn't work, what's happening. And it's also about, as also was alluded to by earlier speakers, about what we can do together with government actors in the international community to address some of these issues. And that there is an information exchange taking place. I think the way that we sort of look at the issue of addressing information on our platform and what it is, I think it is that mix of ordinary citizens, like myself, who's just sharing information on the platform. And I'm not always right in what I say. I may not have an intent to mislead, but I'm certainly not always right. Others may have an intent to mislead or even hide who they are. And actually, that part of it is important as well. And I think if we think about this issue, there's probably not one single solution to the issue. There's a number of things we have to do. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to make it more costly in terms of efforts you have to undertake to be able to deal with trying to run an information campaign on Facebook. In that work, one of the things that we are very much looking into is what's called coordinated inauthentic behavior. And coordinated inauthentic behavior is behavior where someone is trying to conceal who they are, what their status is, and also often trying to make it look like they're a lot bigger and there are a lot more people involved in whatever it is information they're trying to put out. So it's not so much about the content that they're putting out. Some of the content people are putting out can actually be, something that's not verifiably untrue. Maybe it's manipulative, but it's not verifiably untrue. So it's not so much about the content. It is about your behavior and your attempt to try to conceal who you are, your attempt to maybe use fake accounts or other things to make it look like there are thousands and thousands of people that are supporting my viewpoint. And this sort of coordinated authentic behavior is something that we have been addressing in particular over the last couple of years, and trying to identify when we find this kind of behavior. It can be state actors that are doing this. It can be non-state actors as well. It can be domestic actors, and it can be non-domestic actors doing it. And when we find this kind of behavior, we talk about it. We express that someone has tried to do this on our platform and that it's not acceptable and it has been removed. And we name who it is. And just this week, we named 3 Iranian attempts and 1 Russian attempt to act in this way. And that's one way of trying to address this issue of trying to conceal who you are. Obviously, it is something that requires us to have both the technology in place to deal with it, but also the people. And we now at Facebook have more than 30,000 people whose job it is to work on content issues and safety issues, and as a consequence of that, also this issue of misinformation. So it's a big undertaking that we're trying to do. Obviously, it's not something you can just do on your own, or it's an isolated Facebook issue. It is something where we want to work with others. We have, on the content side, for example, engaged with fact-checking organizations. John mentioned that as well earlier. We think that is part of the solution. It's not the total solution. It's not something that will solve everything. But it is important that there is a third party that's not Facebook that can look at information and make a judgment about the actual credibility and truthfulness of information. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, sir. Next question for Ms. Hogmanova. A short one this time. NATO, as known, is a military alliance between 29 countries. The question is, with respect to individual and collective defense, what is a responsible behavior of a NATO member in order to be considered a reliable partner in the area of cyber defense?
So in order to be perceived the responsible and reliable partner, you need to follow some basic principles. Some of those were already mentioned here in the keynote speech. There was a resilience. The another principle was mentioned by General Alexander, which is a participation at the collective defense. I believe that NATO has a quite good mechanism in terms of evaluation of the maturity of different NATO members in terms of their capability to resist, and in order to provide the capability to the all alliance for the collective defense. What I would like to share is some experience from our military side. Last week we had a huge NATO team in Bratislava, which were evaluating based on the capability targets, our capacities in terms of financial processes, operational staff in connection with cyber. And what we realized based on the recent events that Slovakia should more focus on the resilience of its own networks. And why is that? Because of our international engagement. We all know that hybrid threats are not focusing only individual nations, but they are focusing alliances, unions, and partnerships as well in order to make them weaken. And we realized that Slovakia, although is a small country, we end up being very high-profile target and gain huge visibility recently because of our presidency in the Visegrad 4 countries, in the presidency of the Organization for Cooperation and Security Europe, which is also this year, the presidency of the OECD this year. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs was the president of the General Assembly of the UN, and a few years ago we were also the president country of the European Union. And what does it mean? That we are gathering, processing a lot of information, not only about Slovak Republic, but about whole alliance, about all union, and not only in the classified information systems, but we are preparing and processing some strategic materials, some informal position, which are very, very strategic for alliance in our national systems. So I believe in order to be a good, reliable, and responsible partner, we need to invest in our own resilience. And this is the main contribution for a collective defense, because we are also defending the information process there of the partners and the alliance as a whole. So that's it.
Thank you very much. General Molenda, I think this is a difficult subject, and I invite basically everyone, if you want to add something after General gives us his answer. So if deterrence fails, then detection and attribution of hybrid warfare activities is extremely important. It's important in determining when and how states can respond. But attribution, as we know, is problematic in the cyber realm. So we have this attribution problem. It's difficult to attribute an action to a specific actor, or at least sometimes. On the other hand, many actors could fake their identity in the cyberspace, giving clues that indicate an expected culprit, like Russia, for example. And the question is, what is the best practice in this area? Is there any way to overcome this difficulty now or maybe in the future?
Okay, thank you for the question. So, thinking about the attribution issue is the issue. And especially that I think that we live in a time where the cyber arms race is present. So every country is somehow doing their best to build the capabilities in cyberspace, and there is a big difference between present times and the past, because during the arm race in the past, the weapon was like being known. So there was a race between countries, for example, about the nuclear war, nuclear bomb, nuclear weapon. And so the option that one or several countries has such a weapon give a great deterrence. So the weapon was used twice, but even though the information about the fact that one country or another has such a weapon gave a great deterrence attitude, and now it changed. Of course, as an army or different countries do their best to show the deterrence. So there is a lot of military parades where the weapons are being presented and just to give the deterrence aspect of it. However, thinking about the cyberspace, we don't have a cyber parades. Yes, so there is no like official information about the cyber weapons, and so we have a kind of known cyber fog, and there is no clear information which country has what capabilities cyberspace has, and the weapon that could operate with. And thinking about that, I believe the best what we can do, we should invest in intelligence. And so building the intelligence capabilities, ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, to be aware what our opponent, adversary could use against us. And it is not very difficult, I believe, that when you have a quite good intelligence capabilities, the question who is who was the threat actor is not as difficult as without such a capabilities. So I believe we should invest in that, in the collecting information, intelligence about information about the adversary tools, cyber tools, and of course the aspect that was already presented. So share or exchange information about the threats with our partners. And as General Alexander said during the keynote, that if, for example, we have limited resources about this kill personnel, and we share the information about the threats among our partners, and so then we can work together on the issue and try answer the question about the attribution as correctly and as good as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
This is an area where I think the private sector has information that governments don't have. Governments have information that we don't have, but we have 1 billion Windows devices out there in the world that connect to our networks every day, and we see a great deal of what's happening around the world. So with Facebook, we and another company, we were cited by the White House when they made the attribution of the NotPetya attack as having provided technical information that confirmed the attribution in North Korea. We've also we see information, and we have discussions among the industry about trying to triangulate and figure out if the information is confirmatory or not confirmatory. But I don't think the problem is, there's definitely a challenge for false flag kind of operations, but there is information out there. Now, one concern I have is that when governments made the attributions on WannaCry and NotPetya, nobody said they were violations of international law. And if we're going to build up customary international law that says you shouldn't be attacking essentially civilians with cyber weapons, we need governments to take a position on it. And I think that's something it's good that governments are at least willing to talk about publicly who did it, but we need them to build customary international law with their announcements as well.
Thank you, sir. Okay, moving to the next question. This is for General Alexander. Sir, we are talking a lot today about fake news. I prefer to call it disinformation, but this is in the media and everywhere. The question is, in your opinion, in reality, how damaging it is, how dangerous are in fact propaganda and disinformation spread through the internet, through the social media and other means? Because the question is, are people so easy to be deceived? Can we really, and on the other hand, can we really measure the impact of disinformation campaigns on the general population? This is a bit out of the technical realm, I know that, but you have a great experience even in this.
What, with fake news? Or, I was just thinking, as you talk about fake news and you think about all the stuff that goes on. I was in Ukraine a year ago, and maybe a little bit longer, and the Russia-Ukraine issue. And at that time, it was clear that Russia wanted to incite the Russian population in Ukraine by putting out stories. And one of the stories that came out while I was there was that ethnic Ukrainians had bayoneted a 3-year-old Russian boy and put his body on a stake in his parents' front yard. And of course, this got people spinning and completely fake. When the news media went out there, it wasn't even a Russian property. It was all fake. It's the same thing in elections. It's the same thing. So there is, and I think what Facebook, what you talked about doing is exactly the right thing. You see, people can use our emotions to get us going in ways that even after you find out it's not true, you still are mad. And you think about that. The ethnic Russians in Ukraine are still mad, even though there was no boy. They're still mad having thought that you guys would even think about doing something like that. When they say, we didn't do that, you guys made the story up. I have a lot of experience on that when I was in elementary school. I was always in trouble. And you wanted to blame somebody else, right? You'd say it wasn't me, it was Tommy, or it was somebody else. And that's what's going on in fake news. And the problem is, and I agree with what you said about we've got to hold people accountable. Governments need to speak clearly about what's accountable and what's not. What's a rule of, what's a war issue and what's not. We're afraid to draw a red line because we say, well, if that happens, we have to do something. NATO would have to respond. So what we are at is so they can do anything because we don't know where the rule of law, and it goes on with fake news as well. What I think this brings us back to, and the nice part about being out of government, one, I can speak my mind. Two, I also agree with the statistics, 97%. The commercial industry can build the technology in this space. No, let me say it clear. The commercial industry will build the technology in this space. It's the Facebook, it's the Microsoft, it's the Amazon. It's all these companies working together. You go across Europe, you go across Asia. It's the technology that's building this internet together, and it's commercial. What governments need to do is to say, what's an act of war? What's acceptable behavior and not? And how do we hold people accountable? Because until you hold someone accountable for fake news, there's no accountability. Anybody can do it. So we have to come up with a way of doing that. And I think we have to push back. I wanted to bring up one other point because you've asked this. And this hybrid war, there's another aspect of hybrid war, a more, what I believe, insidious, I had to look that word up, a more frightening aspect, our future. Our future, your company's future is your intellectual property. Your nation's future is the intellectual property your bright people come up with. And when they come up with this intellectual property, that's what you sell to the rest of the world. And in cyber, it becomes more important. And I believe the biggest issue that faces our nations today is the theft of that intellectual property. Because those who want to steal that property, the future Facebook, the future Microsoft, the future that, they steal it, they produce it at a lower value, and all of a sudden your future wealth is gone. So when you think about hybrid warfare, there's the facts of things attacking us right now, and then you have this long-term pounding threat, stealing intellectual property. We have to address both, because when you look at the wealth of Europe, the wealth of the United States, the wealth of Southeast Asia, that's our wealth. That's our future. And we're losing that. And I know several have brought up 5G and where we go on 5G. We've lost a lot of that technology that's being created, ironically, was stolen. And now can be produced at a fraction of the price by governments that want to subsidize it. So I think this is where nations need to get together collectively and say enough. We don't want a war in cyber. I've been to war. We don't want a war. I have 16 grandchildren. We want them to have a great future. We want us to solve cancer. We want to do all these things. We don't want a war. But we also have to be thoughtful enough to know that not everybody agrees with us. There will be a war. It will start in cyber, and we need to be ready. So I think all of those on the table, when you put all that there are processes that when you look at what your role and responsibility is, what General Melinda and what we're all doing and what industry can do, we can band together, commercial and government, for the common good, and we ought to do that. And so on this fake news, it's the same thing. We ought to call it out when somebody does it and say, this was done with the intent of creating violence in another country, and it's wrong. Now, how do we help make them pay for that?
Thank you, sir. Please.
I don't feel strongly about that.
Okay. This, of course, obviously is an important issue for Facebook and something we spent quite a lot of time thinking about. I started out talking about the issue of coordinated and authentic behavior because I think that's the area where you see most state actors doing things, trying to manipulate the situation in other countries, in particular leading up to what our democratic infrastructure does, elections, for example. Right? I think for us the issue though is bigger because fake news is many things. Facebook is also people that believe vaccination of children is the wrong thing to do. That can maybe be manipulated as well by state actors, but there are people that have nothing to do with any state actors that truly believe that it's wrong to vaccinate your children. Has quite important and damaging consequences for the children of the world. There are people that believe the earth is flat, right? And so you have these people who are there with certain beliefs, and we have to look at what are they doing? And one thing to look at is, are you actually standing up for your belief? Are you there with your name? Are you there being the person you actually are? And that's why we have a rename policy on Facebook where we want to have people come and show their name so we know who they are. And that's exactly what doesn't happen when you talk about coordinated and authentic behavior, is that people try to hide who they are. But when it comes to the content of what you're saying, I think it becomes a lot trickier to deal with the situation. And that's why we, for example, use fact checkers. And in some instances, the fact checking will not lead to your claim being removed from Facebook. And again, I'll just use this slightly silly example of the flat earth. I mean, if I believe the earth is flat, well, it's silly, but it's my belief. What we might do, we might have such a story fact-checked. We might mark it as being this story has been fact-checked and found to be of questionable truthfulness. We might, underneath such an article, when it shows up on Facebook, present to you other views about this. And we've seen that also in more political contentious situations where people have made claims about other politicians, and beneath those articles we will then present what we call related articles that are other views on the same situation. Going back to the flat earth thing, there would be articles about maybe with a picture of the earth in it, right? And we will also be looking at the distribution, because one thing is that you have your right of freedom of expression, maybe, doesn't require us to distribute your information. You might say it, but we don't necessarily have to distribute it very widely. And that is actually something we are doing. We're reducing the distribution, often with up to 80% of things that are found to be of questionable quality. You can say, why not just delete it? Well, there's freedom of expression. It's not always illegal, or it doesn't always break the rules, what people are saying. And actually, sometimes people react very, very negatively to having that sort of thing taken away, and it's counterproductive. I think, there are many things you have to do here. You also have to educate users. We have to, I think, and this is again an area where I think government and industry needs to work together. It's not an attempt to push responsibility away from us, to the contrary. But at the end of the day, we need to provide the tools for citizens to make their own evaluations, to make their own decisions, and to have the tools at hand that can make them good digital literate citizens in a cyber world.
Thomas, there's a lot of good things that Facebook is doing, but I'm not sure you really get it. I mean, when we look at this recent Select Committee on Intelligence report in the Senate on the 2016 campaign, Oxford Internet Institute's report from just a couple of weeks ago that talks about, many countries are running disinformation campaigns. Your platform is very prominent in it. And I think there is just a concern that, you have to take the reality of what's actually happening on the platform. But it's one thing to talk about people's free speech, but this other thing, when our platforms, we take money for advertisements. We decided that across our ad network, which is much more successful in North America than it is in Europe, but we would not take political ads. In the current context, we felt it wasn't constructive. But we do review commercial ads for, are they deceptive and misleading? We turned down last year placements of 198 million ads that were deceptive and misleading. We do it all the time. You do it all the time in commercial ads. Taking political ads that are deceptive and misleading does not advance the democratic debate. And when we see, we're doing joint research on deep fakes, but when we find a cheap fake, you leave it up. It doesn't make sense. I mean, we need to, truth is a virtue, and truth has got to be a bedrock of democratic discussions.
Are they going to hug?
Afterwards, maybe. But look, we are taking this extremely seriously, and I think there are a lot of questions here, and not all of them are easy to address. I think, for example, the issue, and I'll come back to some of what you said just in a sec, John, but like the issue of pictures, for example, that are used in manipulative ways and are like claiming to be, it might be a picture from a war one place, but it's now being claimed it's being used in a different place. There are all these kind of material that we have to address and try to get the truth out of where was that picture actually taken, what was the actual situation, is it truthful that that happened yesterday in this country or not? And we are trying to address that. I don't think we are the arbiter or can be the arbiter of truth. We have to have, in many instances, third parties that help us with doing that, because I'm not sure people would trust Facebook, and I'm not sure we would be the best at it either. Now, when it comes to politicians and political ads and things like that, and I know this has been very controversial, what we're doing here, I think we can't make the decision that you have made not to accept political ads, because we're much more sort of in the middle of people's political discourse. It would be hard for us to do. And I don't think it's not about the money, it's about the role that we play in democracies. I think when it comes to politicians, it's not a free-for-all. Politicians can't do everything they want, neither can they do everything they want in advertising. There are things they cannot do. You cannot, for example, do voter suppression, which we see as a classical tool being used where people say, don't go and vote tomorrow, the election is canceled, it's next week now, or things like that. You cannot do that kind of thing. So you cannot incite violence either. So there are limits around what politicians can do and what they can do in advertising. But the big and difficult question is, who is actually going to hold politicians accountable? Is it going to be Facebook? Is it going to be the electorate? Is it going to be the parliament? Who is it? And I'm not sure we've come to a conclusion on that as a society. Where's the right boundaries of this, and who should actually do this?
Thank you, sir. Jerome?
So I didn't want to get into the middle of the fight, but I did want to put some thoughts forward on what you both present, because I think you both have key elements that we need to collectively address as nations. And that is, what will we tolerate in media, cyber media, and what won't we? And just getting the people to agree on that first. We want the truth. We don't want people making up stuff. We don't want them using pictures. But how do we do that without saying who's going to do it, but to say, do we agree with those principles? I think we have to have a principled debate and discussion to bring industry together, without government, to bring industry together and say, we have a responsibility to our customers to do this right. And we could put that on our websites as this is what we're going to do as responsible citizens of the world. And we do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And you've named some, and you've put out some. And the reality is, if we all took one step forward and said, we'll stop A, I think we could find that we could take several steps forward and do B, C, D, E, F, all of that. And then look to governments to say, now when it's nation states, how do we hold them accountable? And when it's criminals, how do we hold them accountable? And I think we have to do that in a principled way so that, you know, I agree with you. You can't just jump out there and start doing stuff, but somebody's got to start. And I do agree with the way that you said, you know, here's the things we do at Microsoft. I think the question would be for Facebook and all the other major advertising companies and all the others that have a key part of the global network. What can we collectively do to make this better? People can yell at us now and say, well, I want A, B, C, or D, but I think we know right from wrong. We know the right thing to do. We ought to put that down in writing and say, here's what we're going to do. And get the big companies together and the small ones. You know, that's why I like having Facebook, Microsoft, and IronNet up here, all the same size. Well, close. 4 or 5 orders of magnitude. But when you think about it, it's the principles that would bring us together. And I think if we could agree with that, then we could make big steps forward. And oh, by the way, 97% beats 3%. We could say that back to the government. Here's what we think we should do, which helps the governments take actions that they need.
Just one additional comment on this. But I actually think it's important, and I think we're onto something here. And I think, to be very honest, it probably took Facebook a while to learn. You know, we would traditionally say, don't worry about these issues. We will find a solution to them, technological one, or we'll hire some more people and we'll go and deal with it. What we've learned over the years from, frankly, from making mistakes was that actually we can't do this on our own. We can't solve these issues on our own. Doesn't mean we don't have a role in it, doesn't mean it's not important what we do, doesn't mean we have to that we don't have to invest, but we have to take responsibility. And the culmination of that actually came in March this year when our CEO issued an op-ed about areas where Facebook actually think we should be regulated. Right? And this is one of those areas where I think it doesn't mean regulate us any way you want. It means regulate us, but please do it in a good way. But one of the key things is what we're talking about today. What are the boundaries of content? Where are the limits of what is acceptable and not acceptable? Who should make those decisions? What are the processes around it? And what we have asked is for governments, together with industry, to come up with rules and clear guidance on how these issues should be dealt with. And that includes things like political advertising. And you know, we had a situation in Europe, for example, around the European Parliament elections, where we tried to make some very stringent rules around advertising and what could be done by political actors. And we even asked people, so what do you want? Do you want like ease of use, or do you want like high security? And they all said, high security, we need high security. Okay, we then went and did it. And when we then did it, the complaints start coming in that it was too tight and too difficult to use and too slow and wasn't right and it should be easier to use. When we would say, okay, but then there'll be less security. What do you want? And again, it's an example of a place where I really think that dialogue and the discussion between industry and governments is what we need to get right in the coming years. And that will result in regulation of our industry, and we're fine with that.
Thank you, sir. I think it was a very interesting debate. It is time to move to the next question. I think that we still have time for 2 questions. And the next question is for Ms. Romanova. NATO constitutes a system of collective defense. The question is, how important is the cooperation with other NATO members in terms of cybersecurity? Is it this effort mainly a national one, or is not possible to keep it like this, to be successful?
we have already heard that cooperation is a key. Each individual member state need to cooperate with the international partner, either government or industries, in order to be able to protect themselves. So the cooperation is a key, and it's always been. I remember like 10 years ago when I was working for the CSIRT community, Computer Security Incident Response Community, they were very effective in terms of responding to threats emanating from the cyberspace, because they were willing to share the information very effectively and online. However, at that point, the national governments were quite reluctant due to the national interest and so on. Maybe that's why CSIRT community ended up being something like a backbone for internet security. But why the cooperation is so important? It is often said, and I cannot agree with this kind of saying, that internet does not have a border, or cyberspace does not have a border, because as soon as you end up in the position of incident handler trying to respond to some threats, you get a lot of legal boundaries and boundaries connected with the jurisdiction of your country in the cyberspace. So what is very important? Sharing of technical information in terms of indicators of compromise, sharing expertise. One example, recently our Cyber Defense Center was dealing with a cyber espionage campaign which was targeting one governmental institution. When we started the investigation, security audits log were long gone. We were not able to find out where our data, where the governmental data are leaking. So we started and initiated international cooperation, and we started to share the indicators of compromise. And what we found out is one partner, international partner, who was dealing with the same threat actor as we were. And in this case, there was the first and initial stage of the infection. So literally, the attacker was knocking on the door of their infrastructure and trying to get in form of spear phishing emails. And we found out also another partner whose infrastructure was used and misused, and hosting different CNC servers as well as drop zone where our data were leaking. So we put all those information together, we get overall picture, and we were able to understand the techniques the attackers were using, and we were able to suggest appropriate measure in order to respond to this kind of threats. Also, very important is sharing of the expertise. We have already mentioned WannaCry here and NotPetya attack here. Slovakia was facing those attacks as well. First one crippled our critical infrastructure, especially hospital. The second one has the impact on the Mondelez concern. Mondelez company does have a daughter company, Figaro, which is manufacturing and producing chocolate. So it was a quite significant issue for the Slovak Republic. And with the help of international cooperation, we were able to resist, we were able to prevent, and also to mitigate based on the experience we have received from the other partners.
Thank you very much. If there's no other intervention, a question for General Molenda now. One of the difficulties in the militaries around the world in terms of cybersecurity is to be able to attract and keep the best specialists. And I think that General Alexander addressed a little bit this question in his keynote presentation in the morning. The cyber operations, either defensive or offensive, require smart, dedicated, and educated people. The sort of people that can choose the workplace, the sort of people that expect excellent workplace conditions, and a good payment, good salaries. What are the solutions in general, in your view, and in Poland to attract some of the best minds to fight this cyber warfare?
Okay, thank you for the question. This is very good question, because this is question being asked like among all the cyber commanders and during the forums, etc., because this is an issue that we face to how to attract skilled guys to join us and to stay for a while. And there could be a few answers to that question, so we are doing our best. I believe what helps the most with recruitment is the success. So I believe everyone wants to work in a very good, very successful place and a team that could, where he could evaluate his skills and knowledge. And so for sure, what I could say what we are doing in Poland in MOD, and so we are doing our best to give such conditions to our teams that we do our best to train them. And so we start a few initiatives in the university, military university of technology in Warsaw, and so there is a new branch, new training dedicated to cybersecurity and cryptology. We have a new high school, which is military high school, IT high school, that I believe will somehow give us additional work guys to the team and let them join us. Of course, there are lots of benefits thinking about how, with working at the military, and for sure it is one of the biggest, is a very interesting job, because we as a cyberspace forces face the attacks that are quite sophisticated. So I believe we are targeted from the very sophisticated actors and the teams that doing their best to fight back, to prepare for these operations. They learn during their jobs even. So for them it's like great experience that could be used in the future. So I see that there are a lot of guys, very interesting young guys, to join us just to get experience and knowledge. And of course there are some requirements for those guys. However, there is a lot of interesting things that they can do, and there's always for me as something which is from this patriotical point of view, what could be better than work and serve with your flag on the shoulder. Yes, so I believe we dedicate and we're looking for people that could join us in this matter. But of course the question is quite complex, and I believe every cyber commanders around the world is asking himself, how can what can I do more to convince young people to join their forces. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. If there is anyone who wants to add something, because
so
we should be very
I
close
agree,
to the end of
I agree
this
with
panel.
what General Melenda said. My experience, when I was asked, how do we expect to keep 6,000 people in our cyber force? My answer was, we don't. We're going to train them. We'll make them the best in the world. They'll have a commitment. But it's also great to know that that talent will go out into the civilian workforce, and we'll continue to bring in and recruit young people and give them training in a future job. And they'll know what our country really does, not what's reported in the news. And I think that's hugely important for them to get that. And this is the war of the future. And these are the soldiers of the future. And so what your people and those in the other commands are doing is creating the talent. And I think that's a very good thing to do. So we shouldn't expect that they'll all stay in. Some will. Some will be the future General Melenda, but not all of them. So,
Thank you, sir.
From our enterprise customers' perspective, I mean, the shortage of cyber talent is pervasive, and so, and just a recent conversation passed on was that it's hard for industry specialized groups to bring in cyber people. And a couple weeks ago, we had in Brussels an event with a Finnish company, Outokumpu, which is the world's largest manufacturer of stainless steel. And they were just talking about the talent issues, and like, in a sense, universities are producing too many people with metallurgy degrees and not enough people with cyber degrees. But they found it easier to take somebody with metallurgy background who knows the domain-specific expertise and train them in cyber. And also, as a practical matter, that's a solution for today, not just for future generations. And so I do think that we have to think about how do we invest in our current workforce to get them cross-trained, because while it's wonderful that government produces talented people, we need more than that.
Thank you very much. I think that we ran out of time, and I think we had a great debate. Thank you all for your involvement and your insightful answers. And I suppose that this is the time for a round of applause, right? For you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.